All right, welcome to Peeps Creek, the cafe where we serve you delightful, slightly intense, but definitely worthwhile conversations. A podcast focused on bringing people together by drinking, listening, and conversing. So grab your favorite drink and let's see what's on today's menu. All right, people, welcome to Peeps Creek, the cafe. You know, here at the cafe, we always have a conversation centered around the drink. And today I am back on my usual. That is some bourbon, boom, with a splash of soda water. And I also have some good old H2O for this particular conversation. And today I am joined in the cafe by Denise. Denise, you want to say hello to the people?
Hello, everyone.
All right. And today, finally,
you're not going to
Denise,
ask me what I'm
I'm
drinking?
about to ask you, but before I'm going to rag on you a little bit because you've been using that microphone the last couple of episodes, but you never had the microphone turned on. And so today you actually have it plugged into.
I do. It's the first thing I did. I was like, oh my God.
All right. So what are you drinking on over there, Denise?
Juice. I'm still in my juice.
All right. Okay.
Still waiting for my updated Peeps Creek cup.
Yeah.
Mug.
Okay. Well, you will get it when the Lord says time. All right. So today's episode is episode 67. Episode 67 is Abusive Father or Birth Trauma. This is accused, guilty, or innocent. And this is episode 3 of season 2 of the show. All right. So in this particular episode, it's a kind of a touchy subject. It deals with potential child abuse, right? And so it opens up on August the 2nd, 2018, with a phone call, and it says Detroit, Michigan. Okay, so before we go and talk about the actual 911 call, because I am from Detroit, that is where I was born and raised, that is my hometown, that is everything that makes me who I am. And it kind of annoys me that this particular episode said Detroit, when in fact the guy is from Harrison Township, which is actually a chartered city of Macomb County, which is why this case was brought in Macomb County and not Wayne County, because Detroit is in Wayne County. So
How
Harrison
far are they?
Township is about 30 minutes from Detroit, but it is not
wow.
Detroit. Okay.
Why would they put Detroit in the world?
Because no one knows Harrison Township, and so Detroit would get more bang for its buck on the series. But I don't really like that they use my city for unnecessary fame. All right, so
Okay.
all right, so this episode opens with a 911 call from a father. Now, when you hear the voice of the father, my opinion is immediately before we got further into the episode to try to figure out why he may talk this way, but the father just sounded like he was disinterested. He sounded like he didn't have any kind of sense of urgency with respect to the kid. But apparently his 9-month-old baby, he called in and said that looks like he was having a seizure. It appeared as if he was just staring out and just not able to focus on anything, just looking at the light. He looked disinterested and confused. And so ultimately the ambulance came, 911 came, and they took the child to the doctor. Now, when we get from that particular scene, we then immediately go and we meet the attorneys. There are 2 attorneys in this case, Arthur Garton and Denise Hirschman, because the father in this particular case, Collin Christopher Quint, was charged with child abuse in the 1st degree. All right. So do you want to try to tell the people what kind of transpired once Connor got to the hospital on August the 2nd?
Yes. And just so you know, 1st-degree child abuse carries a life imprisonment.
That
Okay,
it
so do you
does.
want me to start on the 2nd or on the 1st?
Ma'am, you want to tell the people how we got the child abuse from August the 2nd?
Okay. So on August the 2nd, Collin is at home with Connor, and he starts noticing that something is not right. Actually, okay, so I'm just going to tell you first how the attorneys summarize it. And then I guess we can get into more details later. So something was wrong with Connor. So Collin calls wife Lindsay. They take the baby to the hospital. The hospital evaluates the baby. They sent the baby home. They do a chest MRI, but they sent the baby home, and now the baby is having seizures, ends up in ICU, and the
Mm-hmm.
doctors find a subdural hematoma, which is brain bleed.
Mm-hmm.
And because of this, there was pressure on the back of his eyes, which led to retinal hemorrhage.
Mm-hmm.
And they found an increased swelling to his brain.
Okay. And so, what was the doctor's diagnosis as a result of that?
So the shaken baby syndrome slash abusive head trauma.
Okay. And so before we go there, let's look at what that is because we neither one of us are medical doctors. So I am taking this from the Mayo Clinic. There may be other resources where you can get information about that. But essentially what this is this a shaken baby syndrome is a serious brain injury resulting from forcefully shaking a infant or toddler, also known as abusive head trauma, which Denise just said, shaken impact syndrome, inflicted head injury, or whiplash shaken infant syndrome. It says that the shaken baby syndrome destroys a child's brain cells and prevents his or her brain from getting enough oxygen. This form of child abuse can cause permanent brain damage or death. All right. Some of the symptoms that are associated with shaken baby syndrome includes extreme fussiness or irritability, difficulty staying awake, breathing problems, poor eating, vomiting, pale or blush, skin seizures, which is what Connor had, paralysis, and coma. So those are some of the symptoms that the Mayo Clinic has identified as being consistent with shaken baby syndrome.
Could you
All right.
read that bottom paragraph?
Which one?
While sometimes there's bruising on the face,
Oh, yeah.
you may see signs.
Okay, yeah. So while sometimes there's bruising on the face, you may not see signs of physical injury to the child's outer body. Injuries that may not be immediately seen include bleeding in the brain and eyes, which is what we experience here in this particular case, purportedly, spinal cord damage and fracture of the ribs, skull, legs, and other bones. Many children with shaken baby syndrome show signs and symptoms of prior child abuse.
Yeah, because that was something I was questioning myself. Like, were they too quick in diagnosing this? Because there were no mentions of any other, signs on his body. So that's why I wanted you to read that because it does say you may not see other signs.
Yeah. All right. Okay, and so we now have this diagnosis from the doctor of shaken baby syndrome, and because of this diagnosis, the child had to be immediately taken into protective custody. And in this particular case, both parents initially was charged with child abuse in the degree, and the child was placed once he came out of the hospital. The child was placed in the custody of the mother. Excuse me, the maternal grandmother, which is
Grandmother Suzanne,
um, which is the
Lindsay's
wife's
mother.
mother. Okay. So now, did you already talk about the fact that the day before there was the incident where they went to the
No,
doctor? Okay, you want
no,
to talk
because you
about that?
wanted me to start on August 2nd.
All right, go ahead.
So on August 1st, Connor, I'm sorry, oh, I get these names because they start with,
Colin.
with the C. Colin was at home with Connor, and that's when he first noticed that Connor was just, his eyes were just fixated. So he felt something was wrong. That's when he calls Lindsay at work and waits for her to get home. They both take the baby to the hospital. That's where the baby gets examined for his chest. They figure there's nothing wrong with the baby. So they send the baby back home. The next day, which is August 2nd, Colin is still home with the baby while Lindsay is at work. And when Lindsay gets back from work, Colin and Lindsay's mother were outside. They were downstairs, where Lindsay is upstairs with the baby. And so Lindsay starts seeing that something is wrong with the baby and she calls Colin to come upstairs. And so they end up taking the baby again to the hospital. And that's when the doctors say is the shaken baby syndrome.
Now, and part of the problem with part of the problem here is that from the doctor's perspective is that
Mhm.
they asked the parents what happened. What do you know? And the parents said they did not know. They don't know what happened. And because there was this obvious damage to the child's brain and also the retinas, right? The because they had no explanation for it, it appeared, at least it gave the presumption that they were trying to hide something, they being the parents. And so the conclusion was is that the injuries were a result of shaken baby syndrome. All right.
Mhm. This is where I was
Now,
confused too, because I kept thinking, if you guys took the baby the day before, first of all, if the symptoms that you gave the doctor or the emergency room was that his eyes were fixated, why would they do, a picture of the chest? Like in my head, I was like, what does the chest got to do with the eyes?
because I think there was some discussion from is the wife, because I didn't write her name down. What is it, Lindsay?
Lindsay. Yeah.
I think there was some discussion from Colin about an occasion where the baby was upstairs with Lindsay, and Lindsay gave this kind of hair curling cry and told him to get up here now. Something is wrong with Connor, and I think it was something in the sense that he was having difficulty breathing. So they took him to the doctor at that point. And so, because there was difficulty with breathing, I think that's kind of what they communicated to the doctors. And so, because naturally, if the child is experiencing some breath issues or breathing issues, the doctors focus on that, right? Of clearing whatever was causing him to have breathing issues. So I think that's why. Of course, we don't see the medical documentation. We don't know from the story, from the storyline, but piecing the things together based upon what the different versions of it was said between Colin, Lindsay, and the lawyers, that's what I gather.
Well, she later on, as she starts talking, she doesn't really clarify to me personally why they would take the pictures of the chest, but she does say that they were a little naive, and so she wishes that they wouldn't have been at that time, because since that first visit, the doctors were already assuming that they had shaken the baby or they had hit the baby against the wall.
Yeah.
So it looks
Yeah.
like the doctors were already thinking.
Yes, on the second occasion, at least on August the 2nd when he went
No,
to the
she
emergency.
confirmed on the first one.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess there, yes, you could be naive, right? That could be your first child, but I don't know. I just feel like I would be I don't know. I would just be telling the doctor every fucking thing that was going on with him. Like,
So let me ask you this before we get too far.
uh-huh.
With what we know as of right now,
Hmm.
what is your opinion? Is it child abuse or abusive? Wait. Is it abusive father or birth trauma?
Just by what we just talked about.
Just by what you're just talking
Okay,
about.
so let me just say it this way. When I was looking at the episode up to the point that we discussed, I felt like someone did something to him
I
personally.
still have not. I
So,
could not be convinced up until what we've spoken so far that this was abusive father.
okay, and so yeah, and I guess that goes to what the defense was trying to say. So part of what the defense was saying is that there was some rush to judgment from the medical
Mhm,
experts, right? And the rush to judgment with the experts was that they did not obtain Connor's birth records or other medical records.
mhm,
And according to the medical records there, right now, mind you, we don't have we don't have his medical provider speaking, right? The
right.
individual who saw this. But according to the attorneys, is that they don't believe that this was shaken baby syndrome. They think this is more attributed to birth trauma that Connor experienced when he was very young. Because what they said was is that the medical documentation, his medical documentation or history showed that his brain was not developing as with the size that it needed to be, right? It wasn't filling up like it's supposed to be. So obviously, this child, Connor, had some difficulties, medical difficulties from the get go. Now,
Right.
what that indicates to me is potentially that if that's the case, then either either the medical professionals at that time misdiagnosed him or didn't follow up with the proper treatment to determine what can be done to ensure that his brain begins to develop appropriately, right?
Mm.
And neither Lindsay nor Colin indicated anything to me that they had any knowledge about that, about the medical history,
It could have
right?
been that the doctors never even examined the baby for it. So it's just no one knows.
Yeah, but if
No
you
one
have
checked for
medical
that.
I mean, but if you have medical records that shows that at the birth there was this
No.
abnormality in regards to the birth or the growth of the head or the brain, are you saying that the doctors didn't tell the parents that there was some abnormality?
Correct, because all they said was, this is the assumption from the attorneys, because all they said was, one, she was in extended labor, and there was an accelerated head growth, which based on studies, it says that 35 percentile of the kids develop that at birth, where the 83 percentile is 9 weeks later. So that they're going off on that based on the studies. But all they said about them thinking is trauma, because vaginal trauma, is only because she had an extended labor and the accelerated head growth. So it leads me to believe that the baby was never checked. Because when the babies are born in the hospital, they do that regular checkup, right? Just to see if the hearing, the eyes, the regular checkup. They're not doing an examination. They're not taking a picture of the baby's head to
Yeah, but
see.
I don't know. I don't know if I fall for that because when Davion was born, th- they told us his head is the right size, and when we had to take him up for his month checkup, they examined it to make sure that he was growing, that he was within the proper percentile growth parts for all of his body parts and internal organs. I mean, they told us that.
Yeah, but the baby was 2 months when this happened. So the babies typically have that one appointment after the birth, which is 2 or 3 days later. And then when they're going to get their shots, maybe the baby had not even gone to the hospital ever since that one visit after the baby was born.
But the way that okay, all right, I hear you. Okay. Now, mind you, I didn't like this episode, so I thought this episode would
I
be
did.
short. But you said you took a whole lot of notes and you were excited to talk about it. So therefore, I
Now that
had to
I'm excited.
I had to rewatch it so I could try to elongate this episode. But okay, I hear what you're saying, right?
Hmm.
But the way that the lawyers was explaining the medical records, right? Because eventually they bring in this expert on looking at the
That's
will.
where I was fascinated.
Okay, so but before we get there, right? It made it appear to me, at least the lawyers made it appear as if Connor was experiencing some growth mishaps in some form, shape, or fashion. In other words, his cognitive ability was slowed, is what I gathered from the
Mhm.
fact that they're
I didn't
saying there was
gather that.
birth trauma. Okay, what did you gather then?
Oh, again, all I gathered was that they're assuming, right? Not that they're assuming, but to them, the doctors rushed to diagnose this shaken baby syndrome when in turn it really could have been that birth trauma, because studies. So to me, when they kept saying studies, was that they were basing all of that based on studies that they had done. And then when they bring that doctor is where it starts making sense to me, when why they keep talking about studies, because the doctor kind of explains it further. But to me, they're going off of what Lindsay may have told them, which is, I was in labor for an extended amount of time. When the baby came out, because when the babies are going down, if they've been there for a very long time, how their heads grow in that shape. So
Hmm.
that's what I'm assuming this entire time. That's how I took it. They're going off of what Lindsay may have told them. Hey, I was in extended labor. Maybe when I took him to that one appointment, they mentioned something about his head growth, but that was it.
Yeah, but when we meet Connor now, and I think he's what, like two at the time or three when we see him,
3.
three. It's very clear that there are some cognitive difficulties with him because he can't communicate, right?
Right? He
Yes,
has developmental delays.
right. He has developmental delays, which is what I understood they were trying to connect it to the birth trauma, and not that it's due to the shaken baby syndrome. Do you?
Correct, because of the pictures that this doctor is now showing you. So
Okay, so
this doctor.
I didn't take notes on the doctor. So you want to talk about what the doctor talked
So
about.
yes, do we want to talk first about what happened to Colin?
No, let's talk because we're still talking about the birth. I mean
Okay.
the thing because we
Okay,
let's
so this
clear
is
this
Dr.
up.
Smith. I think if I didn't write his first name down, but Dr. Smith, he's a retired pathologist that specializes in medical research. So he tells them that he does believe that, the doctors rushed into that shaken baby syndrome because it could have been that birth trauma, vaginal birth trauma. But he does have scans of the baby's head. I guess
Hmm.
once the baby was in the hospital, they must have taken pictures of his head. And so he
Hmm.
starts showing them the scans. So what he shows them first is pictures of the baby's retinal, so his eyes, the back of his
Hmm.
eyes, right? And so there is injury to one eye, but there's no injury to the second eye. So
Hmm.
Dr. Smith says, how can this be shaking baby syndrome if only one eye is damaged? If this is really shaken baby syndrome, you're shaking the baby, which means both eyes are getting damaged at the same time. So
According to
that's already
studies,
according to him,
right? Which is
right?
according to studies.
You can say what you want, but according to Dr. Smith,
I mean, yeah, but I mean, okay, but so that didn't persuade me or
well, that did to
sway.
me because
It didn't
he
sway me
said,
because hold up, let me
I
go
get
ahead.
passionate,
All right, go ahead.
because
What did
this
he
is
say?
what he said, though. He said, this question has been asked to doctors. How is this possible? How is this possible if you're calling this shaken baby syndrome, only one eye is damaged and not the other? Responses that they've gotten back from doctors is, we don't know how this happens, but from experience, this is what we see.
Right. So, okay. So, to me, what that is telling me, right,
Mhm.
is that shaken baby syndrome impacts and affects babies differently. So there is no one size fits all approach with the symptoms. So in just because both eyes were not damaged doesn't necessarily mean that shaken baby syndrome could not be the cause of Connor's situation. And I'm not saying that it is. I'm not advocating, of course, that it is. But what I'm saying is, okay, that's just one explanation that studies show that there's no consistency. But studies show that all the time. Take it outside of shaken baby syndrome. High cholesterol, something stupid as high cholesterol, impacts people differently. For some
Mhm.
folks, it really impacts them to the point that it's extreme. To others, it's not. And then when you go back to the shaken baby syndrome thing let me pull that back up. It talked about mild symptoms, right, of shaken baby syndrome. And let me pull this back up before I move on to this because
You still haven't convinced me, but okay.
Ugh. I mean, I'm not convinced one way or the other. What I'm saying is what you're saying that this doctor brought up, it didn't save the day for me, is what I'm saying.
It
All right.
did to me.
All right. And that's okay, Denise. You can have your opinion. I mean, you want to be on the defense team over here? You want to ask them if they want to hire
No, no,
you?
no. I
All right,
keep
but
thinking
so
about these
here.
things. Oh, I
All
have a
right.
fruit fly.
All right. Okay. So here it says in mild cases of shaken baby syndrome, a child may appear normal after being shaken, but over time they may develop health or behavior problems. Right.
Mhm.
So the thing is like we only know about two instances where he went to the hospital, and so the question becomes: was this something that has worsened over time? Right, from when it whatever happened that caused him to have this injury, whether it's the birth trauma or the shaky baby syndrome. What irritates me with this particular episode is that we don't have anyone to come in and say one way or the other that the diagnosis of Dr. Smith, or whatever you're saying, the birth trauma, that the cause of birth trauma or the having birth trauma is consistent with the symptoms that Connor showed, which caused him to go to the hospital. Dr. Smith didn't say that. And so that's the point that I guess long-winded way of getting to is that he doesn't rule out shaken baby syndrome. The only thing he offers is that it didn't hit both eyes, and so therefore and doctors don't know why it impacts some individuals in both eyes and others. What are you shaking your head?
He rules out shaken baby syndrome. He says it's
What?
not shaken baby syndrome,
Okay, and
which
so what is
I
it?
agree. I agree with you in regards to there was no one to come and basically say, whatever it is that you said in your lawyer terms.
My
But
soliloquy over here.
you're politically correct, whatever. But there's also no one from the prosecution side giving us a theory of why it is shaken baby syndrome.
They did. They said they
Who?
communicated. The doctors, they communicated with the parents. The parents couldn't give us anything that happened as a result of why he's that way, and we can't deny. Dr. Smith does not deny that there's trauma to the brain.
Okay, let's go back. Okay, let's
Hmm.
go back. Sean, okay? As
Hmm.
a parent, if you are sitting with your child watching TV, because that's what Colin was doing the first night, you're
Hmm.
sitting with your child watching TV, your child is fixated, you feel something is wrong. How are you? That's exactly what you're going to explain to the doctors. What else do you want me to tell you if nothing else happened? All that happened was I'm laying down watching TV with my child, and my child just didn't seem normal. What,
Yeah, but I
what is
guess
it
I
you want me
also
to say?
I also go to the point that in his 911 call, he didn't have a sense of
But that's your
urgency.
problem right there because the doctors did not hear the 911 call.
Well, the police probably talked to the doctors and told him, look, when he called, he sounded like he
No,
wanted
they did not.
he didn't want to he didn't sound like he wanted to get here in a hurry.
And then the
Okay.
second day is the same issue. Lindsay is the one, he's with the baby throughout in the morning because Lindsay gets home at 11. But the second time is Lindsay the one that feels something is wrong with the baby because his leg is twitching and it seems like he's having a seizure. So again, how is it?
Which is a symptom of shaken baby syndrome. But go ahead.
But again, you are saying that the doctors made this diagnosis because they asked the parents what happened, and the parents just said, "I don't know."
Well,
There's
I
no
didn't say
reply to
that.
give you.
I said there's a combination
Run
of
it
things.
back, people. When you listen to this
I said
episode, run it back.
it's a combination of things. It's the fact that you have obvious injuries, internal injuries that this baby has. We can't deny that there's injuries internal. We don't deny
We
that. Dr.
cannot.
Smith does not deny
Correct.
that, right? What he denies is what caused those internal injuries. Okay. Now we have that. The fact that we have these internal injuries, we have symptoms that are consistent with symptoms that's associated with shaken baby syndrome. Then we have both parents who cannot articulate anything as to why they believe this happened, right? And so you also, I mean,
They
what do
can't
you go
articulate
with?
because they were with the baby and nothing happened to the baby. It's not like the baby fell. It's not like they can say, "Oh my God, yes, the baby fell from the bed," and after he fell, they can't say that because that's not what happened. The baby was sitting with him watching TV.
Okay, but what about this? Let me ask you this. Okay. Okay. I would have felt better if they actually did say he fell
It's
because
not
then you
about
give
you feeling
listen, listen,
better.
listen. Because then we have some kind of explanation about what's going on. Okay. You're telling me 2 years later, you're pulling out medical records and it shows, oh my God, there was birth trauma from the beginning, and no one has identified any kind of symptoms to show that Connor had some kind of problems, delays, anything. You mean to tell me that his parents cannot articulate that? When Davion was not crawling appropriately, I'm looking at him and I'm
Deontay,
like, oh, let me finish. I'm looking
no,
at
I'm
him
not
like,
gonna let you finish
what
because
is going on? Because as a parent,
listen,
I need to know why my son is not crawling appropriate like everyone else.
what age
I'm
do they
looking at
crawl?
that.
What age do they crawl?
Woo! He should have been crawling and walking around 6 or 7.
And this baby was 2 when this happened, 2 months.
Okay, go ahead, Denise.
2 months. You are talking about these developmental delays like the baby was a year old when all of this happened. The baby was only 2 months. It's impossible for them to say this baby is not having developmental like every other child. 2 months.
All right,
And
fine.
so the symptoms with the shaken baby syndrome are diagnosed the same with that vaginal birth trauma, subdural hematoma, shaken baby syndrome, subdural hematoma, what is it? Vaginal birth trauma. They are both the same symptoms.
Okay, go ahead.
See why I like this episode? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
anywho. So Dr. Smith then brings another scan, which is a scan of the baby's brain, inside. Are you okay over there? And so he shows them how there is fluid inside of the brain. It's towards the middle of the brain scan, and there's some fluid there. But there's also fluid around the border of the baby's head, like towards the brain area. But the fluid varies in colors. So the fluid in the middle, the first fluid that he identified, that was kind of black. The fluid that was towards the border of the head was kind of white, but in certain areas the fluid will look white, gray, and then black. And so he associates that with blood, because in general blood ages, or it's the same color. It starts going from white to gray to black, which to the doctor it seems that because it's going already in so many different colors, that means that that fluid has been there since the baby was born. And so now it's changed colors, basically from white to gray to black.
Okay.
That still doesn't convince you?
No, I just feel like they were trying to come up with a justification why it's not shaking baby
No,
syndrome.
no.
Okay, let's move to talk a little bit about. Well, I think we can end this section saying that from
That
the
we're going to
conclusion.
agree to disagree.
Well, no. I think you make very valid points, but we do recognize that there was no conclusion one way or the other from a medical perspective with this case. Can we agree there?
Unfortunately, yeah.
All right. So
We have
now
no
let's.
choice but to agree because nothing was ever done.
All right. So now let's talk about Colin. Okay. So initially both were charged, right? That's the mom and Colin, but ultimately Lindsay, the charges against her were dropped. Mainly, I think, because the situation that precipitated the diagnosis of shaky baby syndrome, she was not there. It was just
Right.
Colin. And so Colin is not allowed to be in the same house as Connor by himself. And so Lindsay moved out and moved with the mom because that's where Connor is with her maternal mother. And so Colin gets supervised visitations, very limited with Connor. I think it's a few hours a week or a day or what have you, maybe two. I don't know. They
They didn't
didn't
really mention.
they didn't identify that. All right.
Mm-mm.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about Colin. So Colin experienced a traumatic head injury himself, right? He had a motorcycle accident causing a brain injury, which makes it difficult for him to communicate. Now, when I heard that, right, I thought, okay, I see why on the 911 call he was kind of slow. But then I realized that injury didn't occur until 2 years after
After.
Connor had the
Hmm.
situation. So at the time that he called 911, I still go back to that point that he had absolutely no sense of urgency. And that really irritates me in the sense of if you see your 2 month old baby experiencing something that you are claiming is inconsistent that causes you to think something is wrong, I just feel like you will have more urgency. Like the 911 operator should be telling you, sir, calm down, tell me what's going on. Sir, where is he? Sir, is he breathing? None of that. It's just, I think something is wrong with my child. He was looking at I mean, come on now. It was
I still
nothing.
disagree.
But you didn't listen to the 911 call.
It's not even because I didn't listen to that. It goes back to what you said. For medical conditions, everybody is different. I'm going to react to perfect example with the COVID-19. My symptoms are different from maybe what you experience because everybody reacts differently. The same with emergencies, the same when you are put in different situations or when you are put in situations that are extreme. Not everybody reacts the same. So you
Hmm.
can't expect every single person to react the way you want them to react because there's
Hmm.
an emergency with their baby.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Okay. What else you want to talk about? What else you want to talk about? I got it. I mean, you're not convincing me on here. That 911
We can
that
agree to
911 call,
disagree.
we
You're
will.
gonna have
But
your
if if
opinion,
if I was the prosecutor, that's the first thing I'm going to put on. Let me tell you. Let me give you
but
my
that's the
open.
problem. When we
Hey,
do these episodes, you have to act as the jury,
I
not
am.
the prosecutor.
I'm acting as a jury because the
Well,
first
right
thing
now
is
we deadlock. So
because
there's about to be a
I hear that
mistrial.
911 call and I'm like, bruh, where's your sense of urgency? You have a
Well,
kid who cannot communicate for themselves. You are a parent. It is your job to communicate to the proper officials so that you can get assistance for your child. And you don't do that. And
well, let me ask
that,
you this.
yes.
What do you think would have been Lindsay's reaction had she been the one to call 911?
Oh, she would have screamed probably.
Exactly. Do you see how every person is not the same? You cannot expect for him to be screaming like Lindsay would be screaming.
But what if he's not? What if he's calm, cool, and collected because he actually shook the baby?
Oh my. Well, hey,
What
prove
if?
it to me. Prove it to me.
Well,
Because so far you haven't.
all right, all right. So, what else you want to talk about in this case? I ain't taking no more notes on this case because I
Are you
really
not
didn't
going to
like
talk
it.
about what happened with the case?
Yeah, but I mean, the lawyers try to do an investigation. Typically, in these episodes, the lawyers always try to do their due diligence to investigate what happened. The lawyer do in this case, I don't think they get any further than what they had when they first opened. They talked to Colin and they talked to Lindsay, and to me, what Colin and Lindsay offered didn't add anything to the flavor for me. It was the same old they don't know type of thing. Now, you might have a different perspective, but I don't think they added anything of substance that really changed the flavor of the situation for me.
Well, and
But
this is
go.
again, this is maybe why I feel it was not shaken baby syndrome again, because it's like everyone is expecting them to say a story when they're giving you the story. It's just not the story everyone wants to hear. It's not the story that will associate the baby developing the shaken baby syndrome, which in one, right? I'm already 75% convinced with what Dr. Smith said. But
Hmm.
as you and I keep talking and you keep mentioning things, now I'm in the 85% because again,
Hmm.
you're wanting them to give your story they can't give you because nothing really happened. So again, was this really something that the baby developed from birth? We won't know because it was never proven to us.
Okay. Then it sounds like what you're advocating. I think I already said this, but I'm gonna go back. What you're advocating
I'm not
is that
advocating, I'm giving my
there
opinion.
there was some kind of medical misdiagnosis, that the doctors at the birth or during the process
Yes,
did not capture something in enough time
correct.
to either identify that this could be a potential issue, right? And so that's kind of what I hear you say, that it
Correct.
is
And I could be
is this
biased.
and is disassociated with the shaken baby syndrome.
Yep.
But
And I could.
y-
Hmm.
you have to, I think you also have to give credit in some regards to the medical professionals who actually examined the baby, not the person who's looking at medical records years later. If if they are looking at symptoms that are consistent with a particular syndrome or diagnosis, and that's what they go to, unless you can pinpoint it to really some other medical explanation, then I don't know what to tell you. Right now, sure, people, have had friends who suffered from seizures. Right, so I'm aware of that. Right, maybe he has some kind of condition that they didn't catch early on. And it was the seizures, right, that precipitated into his delayed cognitive response currently. I don't know, but no one has told me one way or the other. And quite frankly, it's the defense job to do that at that particular point because the symptoms align with what the doctors attributed to shaken baby syndrome. And so, as a defendant, it's your responsibility for the defense, I think, to pull doubt into that. And what I hear you say is Dr. Smith, who's this retired person who's looking at these studies, but don't really bring those studies to really say that birth trauma causes X, Y, and Z. Because when I just looked up birth trauma, it really associates birth trauma to the female, the mother, and not necessarily the child. So my question is, okay, you're saying it's birth trauma. Explain to me how that translates to it impacting Connor, because that's the person in
I
this
will explain it to
situation
you right
who was
now.
harmed. Okay, go
He
ahead.
didn't have enough oxygen going to his brain. Remember, she was in extended labor, which means that head was stuck. That head was not going down. That head probably, the baby was probably, and again, everyone listening, I'm not a medical professional, so I could be saying things incorrectly. By all means, feel free to correct me in a respectful way. But to me, is the baby was down there. The baby is being stressed, right? Because he can't come out. She's stressed. She's putting pressure on the baby. Oxygen is not going to the baby. This is why there's C-sections, because you can't push the baby. And in order for the baby not to pass away or something, get worse, we need to rush you into an emergency C-section.
All right. Okay.
No, wait. No, sir. You're not going to stop me because I have to respond to what you said. I
No.
want you to look at shaken baby syndrome, because that's another thing they were saying. They're going by studies. What the symptoms that they are associating with the shaken baby syndrome has not been scientifically
Proven.
proven.
Nor has the birth trauma. But go ahead.
So my point exactly. You
So
and you can't
so
sit
so
there and say that the defense could not prove it, because we never went to trial. We never
okay.
got the opportunity to go through trial.
Okay. So here's what I would say to you. I will give
This
you
like
that.
we really passionate here.
I will give you that, right? I will give you that. But remember, the prosecution's job is not to disprove necessarily that it's birth trauma. The prosecution's job is to prove that it's shaken baby syndrome. Now,
And they couldn't
one
prove it to
thing,
me because we didn't go to trial.
one thing that possibly could have occurred is the evidence should have come in, or there's, I think that the defense, instead of focusing on birth trauma without giving me anything relating to birth trauma, because they just said birth trauma and trying to get there, perhaps what the attack should be is, listen, there's a rush to judgment here because the concept of shaken baby syndrome, including all of the symptoms and how it impacts individuals, has not been conclusively studied. These are, and so doctors who are working to try to protect the child's interest, because when there is a child who's harmed, particularly one who cannot speak and tell you what happened, then it may be more likely than not that they are going to rush to judgment to save the child. Right now, in my view and in my head, I would prefer them to do that than to place a child in harm's way again and sending them back to potentially abusive home where they can have even more detrimental things happen to them. So I don't know. I mean that's just where I'm at.
You wanting too much from the defense when we couldn't. They are giving you what they worked with to the date, because again, we didn't go to trial. So you're asking for something that you don't know if they had it. Just like I don't know if the prosecution was going to
Well,
prove to me
they surely
about the
did.
shaken baby syndrome.
They surely did say
You
nothing.
didn't
They
give them.
brought this
You don't.
man.
You don't know. You
But
don't know.
here's what we do know. What we do know is that they talked about how much they got paid, which was $30,000, and the money ran out. And essentially, what they were saying is, we really can't withdraw because it would be prejudicial to our clients, so we had to stay on and not get paid. Like, why was that ever
But he
important?
also said
But why was that important?
I wouldn't be defending him if I didn't think
Oh
he
my
was
god!
innocent.
Oh my god!
I
Please.
just think you didn't go in
We didn't
with
need
an
to
open mind in
hear
this episode.
we didn't need to hear how much money he got paid thus far and whether or not the guy can afford it
Honestly,
any further.
this is my conclusion. Okay. And please, can you put me, just me, because I want to tell you what my conclusion is. You are just upset that they started this episode putting there Detroit, Michigan, when it's not Detroit, Michigan. So you were not thinking objectively throughout the whole episode. That's what I really think.
Okay. All right, maybe, but I'm still
Oh
not
no,
convinced.
I know
I'm,
you. I know
I'm
you.
still
So I
not
know that that
convinced.
pissed you off. And because that pissed you off,
All right.
you did not do anything else.
So ultimately, in this case, there was a scenario where they were going to trial, but Colin wanted a non-jury trial. And for some reason, and I didn't do enough research on this because typically the aspect of a jury trial is within the province of a defendant. But apparently, the judge denied the request for a bench trial and not a jury, and denied the request for a bench trial. And it may just be something in Michigan that allows them to do that. And so, every state constitution is different. And I'm not licensed in Michigan, and I didn't bother to do the additional legwork to investigate why that was denied. And they didn't say it in the episode.
Well, this is what they said, and I don't know if it has to do with it, but I wanted you to explain this to me. What does it mean that this was the oldest case in the judge's docket, so he wanted to get rid of this case? What does that
So
mean?
yeah, and most judges, I mean, every judge has a docket, and there are aging histories with dockets. And remember that a criminal defense has a right to a speedy trial. So when there is a case that is stagnant and on a docket for a long period of time, it's incumbent upon a judge to move their cases along because they also get dinged from that because they control their docket. And so it's important for them to ensure that they're adhering to everyone's constitutional right for a speedy trial and that there are not unnecessarily undue delays. Because if you have too many delays, it could potentially prejudice a defendant. And therefore, sometimes as a procedural mechanism, you can actually get from under a case because of those undue delays, which cause prejudice to a defendant. So the judge rightfully wanted this off his damn docket, one way or the other. Now, I'm not sure the way it came across as if the judge was basically saying, look, y'all figure it out, so get off of my docket. But I'm not sure that's what occurred. But that's kind of what was going on there. Because remember, that then sparked the conversation about a plea deal
No, that
between
came
the
before.
no, because remember
Yes.
the judge. No, remember the judge. They had a conference because he wanted to do the bench trial. They had a hearing for that, and that was denied. And he told them that they need to work it through to do a plea. Oh no, you're right. The plea deal was given to them. They went to a hearing, both for the plea deal and the bench trial. The bench trial was denied. Colin decided he was not going to take the plea deal, but the
Right.
judge didn't accept that. He said, "I'm going to leave it on the table for now." You're
Mhm.
accurate. And the plea deal that they had gave him at that
I'm
particular
accurate
time
throughout the whole episode, sir.
was two. What was the plea deal? Oh, they
Second
were
degree
reducing to
child
second degree
abuse.
with up to 10 years, but could
Yeah.
get probation.
No guaranteed, but yeah.
No guarantee. Now, at some point in that process, right, Colin says, "No, I don't want to do it," right? Then he goes and he talks to his wife, and Lindsay basically says, "Look, we need to get our family unit back together. I understand that you don't want to be convicted of child abuse. Nobody wants to do that, especially when they did not do anything to their child. But our top priority is putting this behind us so that we can work to get our family unit. And so I think you need to take the plea." Right? That was one night. The next morning, they were going to visit the lawyer so he can essentially he Ben Collin can essentially say, "Look, I thought it over. The judge left it on the table. I'm going to go ahead and take it." But what happened was the prosecution called the defense lawyer and was like, "Nah, bro, we're taking this off the table, and we're
Hmm.
back to first degree child
No, there's still second
abuse."
degree.
No, they took the plea deal off the table. So they was going to
Oh, that's
continue
right. That's
moving
right. That's
forward with
right.
the first degree. And so at that point, they were moving towards
Trial.
getting ready for trial. And one thing that the lawyers indicated, which I do think is accurate, is that child abuse cases are very sensitive cases. They pull on the heartstrings of juries, which is
Hmm.
one of the reasons that they want a bench trial, right? Because the presumption is that a judge would be able to wade through the evidence and not be swayed by emotion. And so they were trying to figure out, how do you present this to a jury, particularly when we have no true explanation about what happened, right? There is nothing that could have been an intervening episode that could explain it. And when I mean an intervening episode, similar to what you said earlier, falling down, right? If he fell out of his crib, right, that could have explained the
Hmm.
the internal
The injury.
bruises and
Yeah.
injuries, right? So we don't have any of that. And so we need to fall back on this birth trauma, but we're going to have to be able to explain that vividly to the jury so that they can get the separation, which is touchy. I mean, look at us in this conversation.
Hmm.
We're
Hmm.
going back and forth, back and forth, back and
Yeah.
forth. And
And
I'm,
we still have not, you still in your stance, I'm still in mine. So, maybe it would have changed our minds had we seen more stuff coming in from the prosecution side,
Right.
or maybe the defense taking a different, route. But I'm still convinced that it wasn't shaken baby syndrome.
Hmm. Now, Now, Colin, so they get ready for trial, and so then they go to a pretrial conference, which is essentially a conference for a judge to get ready for trial. At a pretrial conference, you can do a multitude of things. You can argue about the admissibility of evidence. You can argue about the actual crime that the individual's been charged with, whether or not there's sufficient enough evidence to go forward with it or not, right? And so at the pretrial conference, there are some discussions, and we don't get to see the inside of the courtroom because they don't let the cameras in because of COVID. But ultimately, the prosecution put the plea deal back on the table at the pretrial conference, and Colin decides to accept that, right? So he pleads no contest to second degree child abuse, which again faces up to 10 years. And so the next thing would be for the judge to decide what his sentence is.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, what is his sentence?
2 years probation, 8 months in jail.
Okay. And we also don't know, with respect to Colin's ability to then reunite with his family, we don't know whether or not his parental rights will be or is going to be restored at the conclusion
Right.
of this particular episode. So it looks as if he might have served his time and was released on January 22nd, 2022. I did some additional research on this. But before I go into my additional research, do you want to talk about anything else about what was on the episode?
No, no, I
Okay.
think that was all I had.
So apparently there's this whole big issue with the prosecutor in that particular case.
Yep.
And so right now, folks were petitioning to have that prosecutor removed from office. And they were petitioning to have him removed from office because there was an uproar in regards to the sentencing for Colin, because they felt that the prosecution office was not looking at child abuse cases appropriately, were pleading them out and pleading them out at times or sentencings that were that were incongruent with the facts of the case. Now, one thing that we did not hear on this episode, but according to this news article,
Mhm.
the boy's brain injuries were so serious, the boy Ben Connor, that he was placed on a ventilator for at least 10 days. He underwent 2 life-saving surgeries on his skull, according to
Mhm.
the sentencing memo as it relates to Colin. The child suffered from subdural hemorrhages, numerous and multi-layered retinal hemorrhages, actual brain tissue injury, and neck ligative injuries, the memo said, according to
Oh
the
wow.
sentencing. And they also said that Colin delayed taking the boy to the hospital, even though he was having seizures, according to the memo.
Oh, see, had that been introduced, and this is one episode that I can tell you I was not emotional about. Usually, I don't like whenever I get something from the court for jury selection or jury duty or anything like that. I'm always like, oh my god, no, because I'm so emotional that I don't know if I'll be able to be rational about my decisions. But this is the one episode where I went just based on what the doctors were actually saying.
Yeah.
But
And
had
so
they
here,
said that, I would have been like, nope.
yeah, so this is from May 22nd, 2021, May 24th, 2021, Detroit Metro Times. This is the prosecutor that they are trying to get out for whatever reason, various reasons. But this is where they outline some of the issues relating to the injuries, Connor's injuries, as it relates to the memo that was found by this particular news article. So hearing that, I mean, that's why I'm like, I'm not convinced that it wasn't shaken baby syndrome. And
But you had that ahead of me.
no, I wasn't convinced from the beginning when I watched the episode from the
But
911
that's
call.
because they put the Detroit, Michigan in there.
All right.
So you would not
And
objective you did not do an objective decision on this one.
And so, just so you all know, the case is not over. The prosecution office is appealing the decision with regards to sentencing. They felt like he should be there longer. Both parties have filed their appeal brief with the Court of Appeals for Michigan, and they are going to have oral arguments on the case as it relates to sentencing. I think it's October the 5th, 2022, so upcoming. So whenever the Court of Appeals decide what will happen as a result of this, there definitely would be a follow-up at least some follow up information in regards to this particular case.
Another
So
update that I have, I don't know
wait.
if you have it.
Oh, go ahead.
Did you hear about how he suffered the accident? Did you read that?
I did not. No, no.
So he was intoxicated. He was drunk. He had 0.21 blood alcohol level when the accident happened. And he still has an outstanding drunken driving charge for that. Yeah.
But you said that it's birth trauma. Now
Because again, I'm going
this
based
man could
on,
this man could have been in his house drunk. The baby could have been crying. He probably was trying
yep.
to sleep and got upset. Took that baby and shook him.
But again, I'm going by what's been presented on this episode. That's all I can do.
Okay, so now let's ask this question. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the facts that we've just articulated, that about the drunk driving, as well as the facts in regards to the injuries, were disclosed in the episode. Do you think that would sway you that maybe potentially there was shaken baby syndrome associated with this?
Yes. So I would say it is abusive father. It is not birth trauma. Yeah. I'm telling you, I went based on what this episode was giving me. I didn't go based on, I didn't do any research until after that you texted me and said, oh, I got further info. So I was like, well, let me go in and see what this info could be. And that's when I found what you mentioned about, people being upset. Apparently that prosecutor has some sexual harassment allegations
Charges.
against
Yep.
him as well.
Several, like three
Um,
or four.
mhm. So I started reading that, and then there was an article about how Colin suffered his injury, his brain injury. He was
Yeah.
drunk.
So, some people ask me why, like, why not necessarily why, but the discussion about crime, we've been doing it for some time, which I really like because I watch ID and all that stuff all day, every day,
Mhm.
right? But I say this these episodes truly highlight the importance about who you vote into your office, right?
Mhm.
People don't want to go. I'm not trying to get all political, but people don't want to do elections. They don't want. What's the point? Blah blah blah. Okay,
Agree.
local elections are the most important elections because they're going to impact you the most. And so this prosecutor had to have been voted in, right?
Mhm.
And so it's important that people do their due diligence and understanding who they are having represent them because these people represent the people, right? Prosecutors represent the people. They don't represent individuals. And so it's important that you get individuals in there who understand their job, understand the import of their job, and they have a history of dignity, credibility, right? And the rationale to make appropriate decisions because these are individuals who will decide what charges to bring, when to offer a plea, when to accept the plea, what type of, whether or not to contest whether or not a person needs to be bailed out, this, that, and the third. So it's important to know the individuals that you are electing into your office. And, that include judges, a lot of state judges, they have to run for office. That means people have to vote them in. And again, you want someone who has the best interest of justice, whatever your concept of justice may be. If it is that justice is blind, like how it's supposed to be, you need someone in there who has the integrity and credibility to be fair and impartial to render justice. So, anyway, I don't
Well,
want to get on
another
my high
thing,
horse.
no, 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 another thing that I forgot to mention in this article that I found, that law office that was representing Colin,
Hmm.
they donated toward his campaign.
His campaign. Exactly.
Yes, all three of them, all three
Exactly.
lawyers.
Exactly. Right.
Crazy.
Now, did that constitute a potential conflict of interest for them? I don't know because I don't practice in Michigan, right? But
Would it in
certainly,
Virginia?
I don't practice in Virginia.
Well, wherever you practice, would it be a conflict of interest?
It may not be a conflict of interest for the defense team, but it might have been a conflict of interest for the prosecutor, and the prosecutor
Mm,
probably should have given the case to someone else.
wow.
Right.
It's a very
Or
interesting
sometimes, and,
case.
and sometimes in that situation, if the conflict impute, because sometimes there's a conflict that's going to impute to everyone that works there, right? There are conflicts that impact just the individual lawyer, but there are also conflicts that will impute to the entire organization. And since he's the prosecutor and arguably he would be looking at and deciding the way of that particular office, it might have been a conflict that imputed to the entire office, and it might have been beneficial for him to reach out to a neighboring prosecutor office to ask them to handle this particular case. But
Mm.
I don't know. And sometimes with conflicts, it's not just whether it violates the law; it's whether or not it gives the impropriety or the perception that there's impropriety. So it's incumbent upon practitioners to recognize what those are, so that you can make the appropriate decision, so that you don't have these type of situations come out. So yeah,
Mm. Interesting.
very interesting. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that is episode 67. Episode 67 is Abusive Father or Birth Trauma. We don't know from the episode, just looking at it, one of us was on Abusive Father the entire time. The other one was birth trauma, whatever that means. And then when we added the extra evidence, it looks as if we both maybe migrated to, well, one of us
Abusive
stayed there,
father.
but the other one took the train over to Abusive Father. And I'm glad you finally, whether, even though you probably had to take economy to get there, so you got there a little late, it took a little while, you got there, and that's the most important thing.
I
All
was
right.
just going based on the facts.
All right. So I want to thank Denise for being here once again to have these conversations and bringing your opinion. You want to say anything to the people?
No, it's always a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you can make sure that you contact us, like us on Facebook at Peeps Creek Cafe. You can reach us on IG, Twitter, and Twitch at Peeps Creek. You can, what? Oh.
I'm trying to
You're
show where it is.
You can view us on YouTube at Peeps Creek Podcast. You can go to the website. All of the episodes, audio and video, as well as transcriptions are there. That is www.peepscreek.com. If you have comments, questions, or want to be on the show, you can send us an email at cafe@peepscreek.com. And all of our links to everything is here at cafe.peepscreek.com/links. All right. And until next time, make sure that you continue to drink, listen, and converse. Peace and love.